Good morning, everybody, to this webinar hosted by HEPI and our partner Kaplan International Pathways, who we'll be hearing from in a moment. As you know, we're here to discuss the issue of career support and employability for international students. We've published a report again with Kaplan, our partners, this morning on this. We've got hard copies available if anybody would like one and you're not already on our mailing list, and it's also available in electronic form on our website. My name's Nick Hillman. I'm the director of HEPI, the Higher Education Policy Institute, and we're, as I say, hosting this webinar with Kaplan. And I'm just going to give a short introduction to the research we've launched this morning, and then I'm going to hand over to our three speakers, who I will introduce as we go. And then there'll be an opportunity for audience participation, for you to put your questions to the speakers. Please use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. The chat function is open too, but I suggest we keep that for any technical issues, which my colleagues can help with, and that we keep the Q&A for the substance of the issues we're going to talk about this morning. We are recording the session so that we can make it available to people who aren't able to attend live, so please be aware of that. And when it comes to the Q&A, we will see if it's possible for you to ask your own questions. So we'll turn on your microphone and get you to ask your own questions, so you can put it in the way that you want to the panelists. We won't turn on your camera, but we will turn on your microphone if you're happy with that. So do keep the questions coming in the Q&A as we go through. So let me just say a few words about this research. I mean, for us, it's a really important project. We do about 25 projects a year, but this one is quite different because it is on an issue that far too little has been written about in the past. Surprisingly, there's the odd AGCAS and Universities UK paper on the issue, but it's surprisingly hard to find really good information about what international students think about the career support at British universities and employability support. So we've worked with two other partners, CRAC, who we'll hear from this morning, on focus groups with international students to find out what they really think, and also Sybil, who used to be known as Trendence, part of Group GTI, who are also on the call this morning. So if anybody has difficult questions about their part of the research, which is the opinion polls, the opinion poll that we did with over 1,000 international students, they can respond directly to you. So it's different because we've worked with two different partners. We did the focus groups before the opinion polls, so one could inform the other. And I think it's different because this research really embeds the student voice. You know, we know from all our work that our projects come to life when students are at the heart of them. And students are absolutely at the heart of this project. And in fact, we'll hear from an international student in the UK at Bournemouth University as part of this morning's session. The research has taken us a few months to put together because it is more detailed than many projects that we work on. And for me, the catalyst for the bit of work, it was, well, with actually two catalysts, it was twofold. The first was that I was very aware, and our partners were very aware, that international students, like home students, enroll in higher education and seek to better themselves through education, primarily, not only, but primarily because they want a rewarding and fulfilling career after study. And yet the evidence base on the support they expect to receive is quite thin. And then the sort of other catalyst for this piece of work was actually a conversation I had with someone who is on the call this morning, called Kwame Kwarteng, who was General Secretary of Manchester University Students' Union, a sabbatical officer. And I hope he doesn't mind me telling the story, but I said to him at the end of his term of office, you know, what is the one thing you would really like to have fixed that you think there are still issues on? And he said, well, as an international student myself, I'm very conscious that international students want as much career support, employability support as other students, and it's a mixed picture across the sector. I'm not making any specific points about any specific university. And this got us thinking about all the sorts of really big, important questions we felt needed a better answer than had yet been provided. So, for example, should international students expect exactly the same sort of careers and employability support as home students, or should it be tailored to their specific needs? Can international students reasonably expect British universities, or indeed universities in other countries, to know about their home labour markets, given that most international students at some point do intend to go home, even though many also want to spend some time in the UK labour market? And should career services offer exactly the same work experience and internship opportunities to international students and home students, given different visa requirements and so on and so forth? So there's some really rich questions that we felt needed to be answered, and I'm sure they will come up in the course of this morning. One thing that really stood out for me from the research is that some of these issues are not simple, they're nuanced, and in fact, international students from different parts of the world and on different course types might often and do often give a different balance of answers to some of the crucial questions. But one issue that came up that I think is very interesting is, should UK career services be expected to know about labour markets elsewhere in the world? And I conducted a straw poll. I've been doing it unofficially with all the international students I've met recently, who I've said to them, do you, what proportion of international students do you think expect their UK university's career service to be an expert on labour markets abroad? And they all gave me an answer north of 80%. So they all expected that about 80% of their fellow international students thought UK universities' career services should know about labour markets in other countries. But in our focus groups, we found something slightly different. We found that many international students themselves, when you ask them directly, are sceptical that that's a reasonable expectation. And in the opinion poll, we found a dead heat. We found exactly 42% of students agreed with the idea that UK career services should know about labour markets elsewhere, and 42% thought that was probably an unreasonable expectation, with some don't knows as well. And we delve more deeply into that in the report. So I think that shows how complex and nuanced and sophisticated the conversations we need to have on this issue need to be. And our goal with this report is to add to the evidence base and get a conversation going. None of us claim this is anything like the final word. Our job as a think tank is to make people think and to encourage conversations. It's not to tell people what to think or to claim we have all the answers. So we're now going to move to our three speakers. We're first going to hear from Linda Cowan, who is Managing Director of Kaplan International Pathways, who are a fantastic partner of HEPI and have partnered with us on much of our research on international students, including around our research on the financial contribution international students make to the UK, for example, and the tax contributions that international students make when they stay here to study afterwards, and also actually on our groundbreaking research, which continues to be the most detailed piece of research on the likely impact of Brexit on international student flows, where we predicted 5 years ago that EU student numbers would drop off by a little over 50%, which is exactly what has happened. So first we'll hear from Linda, who, as well as her role at Kaplan, has experience working in India and are working at a range of UK universities, Newcastle, Birmingham, Abertay, for example. And then after Linda, we'll move straight to Robin Mellors-Bourne, who works at CRAC, who worked with us on the focus groups for this piece of research. Robin is an expert in careers and has worked on over 50 studies linked to career support. He's also completed a range of studies on internationalization, including some for the government. And I know that because when I was a civil servant in the business department, we used to rely on Robin's research on international students. And then last but not least, from the panel, we'll hear from Meisha Kodipo, who's a Kenyan citizen, and he's done a foundation course at Bournemouth University this year and in business law and finance. and he's now on a course still at Bournemouth University on international hospitality management. He arrived in the UK in January of 2021. We've asked the speakers to speak for no more than 7 minutes each, so that we then have plenty of time for your questions. Do put them in the Q&A, and for full audience participation. And we will wind up the session in about an hour's time at 11:45. So we'll keep it short, sweet and snappy. So Linda, over to you.
Nick, thanks. Thank you very much for that. And Nick, you actually touched on what I think is really one of the very interesting points, and that's that expectation of international students in terms of universities understanding their own sort of local markets. So I'm really hoping that comes through in the sort of Q&A sort of session. But really what was behind the interest from the Kaplan side is we've been working with UK universities for well over 15 years, and doing what we thought had always been a pretty good job, helping to recruit international students and prepare international students for their degree programmes at our partner universities. But what started to come through really strongly, probably a good 3 years ago, when we were holding our own sort of focus groups and surveys amongst our own sort of international student body, is that they actually were expecting more from us. Of course, they wanted to make sure that we were delivering courses that were preparing the students for success once they progressed into the degree programme. But it was coming through really, really strongly that they were saying it's not just about degree success, or degree success for us is all about being successful when we're looking in the job market and we're planning our future careers. So we did a massive sort of revamp of our courses, led by sort of our team internally, looking at how we could start to bed in much more around career exploration and sort of like skills development for future employability actually into our pathway courses. And I've been getting feedback from students really over the last sort of 18 months around the impact of that, and looking to develop it. But what came through in our own internal discussions is sort of two big questions, and that's really what was behind our interest in getting involved in the report that's been launched today. And really the first question was actually how important is careers and employability when students are choosing not only the country that they plan to study in, but also the institution that they plan to study in. So really, does it influence the student decision making at the pre-arrival sort of stage? So that was probably one of the big questions. And then the second big question that we had is actually trying to understand more about the students' expectations before they leave their home country. And then once they're in the UK, how does that match up to the reality of the experience? Does it exceed the expectation? Does it match it, or does it not quite match it? So they were probably the two big questions that were behind our interest in getting involved in the work that's been launched today. I think for me, in terms of the report itself, there were probably three key things that came out that sort of really interested me. The first one is actually partly answering one of those first questions. It came through so strongly that actually when students are exploring where they're going to study, and that's both country and institution, looking and finding out about the career support they're going to get and the skills that they will develop on their course to help future employment, it came through massively strongly. And for those that had a chance to skim the report, 82% of students said it did influence in terms of it was important or very important for career support, and 92% of students said that actually understanding the skills that they would develop for employment was either important or very important. So clearly it does make a difference in terms of students and where they're thinking about study. So I think that was probably one of the big things that jumped out to me. And the other point that came out to me quite strongly was the fact that students who see employability is embedded into the course when they actually can see real transparency around the skills that they're developing and how that will help their future employment searches, or whether they're doing work experience or internships as part of the course. They definitely came through in the research as actually being happier than students that couldn't quite see that connection education. Now, that to me raised another question around, well, maybe that's about transparency of skills being embedded into courses rather than not being there, but there was something there around building that transparency and or having skills embedded into course, actually students do feeling as if they're much more better prepared and happy with the support that they would get. So that was probably my second one. I think the third one was a reflection point, and that was really the data that is definitely suggesting that students become less happy with the support they're getting further through the degree programme that they are studying. And obviously that's a worrying trend, and I think something for the sector we've got to reflect on to work out why that's happening and to see whether we can address that. But that was probably one of the noticeable outcomes that was coming through. So I think for me, really looking forward, there are probably sort of like 3 points that I just wanted to draw out for the discussion. I think the 3 main points that I would probably draw out is, if career support is important in terms of the student decision sort of making, how can the UK sort of really lead this and lead the agenda so that actually we become very much known as the country you go to because of the skills and employment support that is actually done as part of university study. There's great work happening across the sector, but I think I would do a shout out to say that obviously the graduate visa route was hugely important, but it's only ever going to be one part of doing this. So how do we build the transparency and work together in the sector to really develop that level of employment support? So that was probably one key one. Second one I would draw out is just that reality that there's a very significant amount of revenue that's brought into the UK. That's been part of our reports with HEPI. But in my calculations, if you looked at even 1% of the tuition fees coming in from international students in 2019-20, that would account for 69 million. Now, 69 million going into specific support for international students could definitely make a difference. And I would argue that 1% is certainly not enough, but it raises that question about how much we're actually ring fencing tuition fees to provide the support for international students. And then my last one is really just a sort of setting the scene. There's more work that clearly is being done in the sector just now to try and get strong employability outcomes for international students. But I think that's a massively important area. And without that, without us really being able to get good participation rates from international students and real data on where international students are going on for future employment, we're never ever really going to be leading the way when it comes to the global competition for international students. So that was my key points, and I'll now hand over to Robin.
Good morning, everybody, and thanks, Nick, and HEPI for inviting me to take part today. Nick's asked me really to talk about some sort of reflections based on the focus group side of the research. Very happy to do that. I did take part in all three myself, and as always, that kind of research is quite sort of rich in delivering perspectives and bringing things to life, I guess, which you may not entirely see through the survey. On the other hand, what we have to accept is that they were only 3 groups. They were with different levels of students, and you certainly can't regard them, therefore, as being representative of the views of all international students. If I may, I'm just going to touch on several of the areas that Nick and indeed Linda have already raised, but try to give you a bit of depth from what I took away from those groups. So thinking first about the prospective students and what they were thinking about their expectations before coming to the UK in relation to employability support, and how that influenced their decisions. I mean, it was very clear in the groups, absolutely, that the vast majority of students had been thinking about employability in their future careers when they made their choices. There were 1 or 2 still, perhaps in the old style, that thought that simply the prestige of the UK degree would be enough. But the vast majority weren't like that at all. And what we did see was that although some of them seemed to be well aware of what their university would be offering them when they applied, and that had influenced their choice, for others, they seemed genuinely surprised once they got here about just how much was on offer. They were amazed at not only the range of opportunities that were there for them, the support, but particularly about how well embedded it all was. And Linda's spoken a bit about the efforts at Kaplan to drive things in that direction. And I suspect really that this tells us something perhaps about the marketing offer that needs to be made by UK universities, that maybe it should be a bit more nuanced, and that probably we have got something genuine and unusual in the way in which it's not only a wide range of support, but it's very well embedded indeed. More interesting to me, perhaps, was actually what the students experienced once they did get here. And Nick has raised this question of whether UK university careers teams can genuinely provide really detailed information about the potential labour markets in international students' home countries. This was touched on in an AGCAS report last year, which did suggest that many universities were doing this, although it did raise that the lot were struggling to resource it. As Nick said, in the survey, it was pretty balanced. About 40% of the students said they wanted it and 40% didn't. And to be honest, the group was a bit different. What the groups were saying, really, when they discussed it, and we did discuss this at some length, was that they actually thought it even naive that UK universities could try to provide the really detailed information about particular employers and graduate schemes in all of the countries that international students came from. And when they thought about it, they kind of went in a slightly different direction and coalesced perhaps around the thought that really what they wanted was to be seen as globally employable graduates. And so what they were looking for was development of the competencies that would really enable them to be seen that way. So they'd be employable in a range of local labour markets across the world. And my instinct is perhaps that actually the offer should largely be focused around that rather than necessarily claiming to do everything in every market. So building that global employability, and that in turn will build upon the benefits and impacts that the mobility has in the first place in things like developing intercultural awareness. So one of the key issues we have talked about already is work experience. And I think in the groups we saw evidence of a real gap between what they were expecting and what actually they got in reality. So many had found it very, very difficult and far more competitive than they thought to get sort of structured work experience placements. And I have to say that the students that I met in the groups were highly motivated, very talented students indeed. And these were, I imagine, many very strong students. So they felt a bit let down, to be honest, by what they perceived that they would get in the offer. They thought the university would help more. In some cases, perhaps a bit naively, they thought the university would arrange it for them. And it has to be said that this was all seen in the context of COVID, and I'm sure there was a decline overall in the availability of placements and the type of them, at that time. But what I guess emerged was that they were convinced that it was harder for an international student to get a work experience than it was for a UK student. And I'm sure that the limits to casual work and so forth in the visa don't help that. But I think it's an issue we really should talk about, because can we really expect UK employers to go out of their way to provide opportunities to international students? I mean, employers are being pushed very hard already. They're encouraged to support school level experiences of work, the new T levels, further education. That work experience is a massive part of that offer. And we tend to see work experience as this kind of magic bullet to enhance everybody's outcomes. So they're not only being approached at undergraduate level, but others too. And I think a lot of employers, particularly small ones, are pretty cautious about what they're allowed to do legally. They really don't want to break visa rules and so forth. If I'm brutally honest, working in a small SME myself, if we had the choice between a UK student and an international student for a placement, we would probably take the UK student. So I think all this has to be seen in the context that the international student is paying more in the first place. So this is a really good example of Nick's title for today's event. Finally, just touch on post-study work. We could see in the survey that 3/4 of the students said that they wanted to stay in the UK for a while after study, do some work, and then probably ultimately return home. And that was very much seen in the groups too. They appreciated that the new graduate visa was great in that it enabled a couple of years of work after study. But there were practical difficulties. As I understand it, once you actually finish your course, you change status. And as a result, your outgoings go up really quite fast. And of course, you don't actually have any income until you've actually got the job. So practically staying here to apply for a job that you're entitled to apply for could be very difficult indeed. And it may be that our policies aren't entirely joined up to enable the practical delivery of what the new graduate route visa enables. And then just finally, I was interested by the fact that half of the students in the survey felt that they would like ongoing careers advice from the university after they'd left. Now, I think it's fair to say that UK students are almost universally entitled to this for some period after leaving. And I'm not entirely sure that universities are resourced enough to provide this for international students, nor indeed that they're aware that they can have it. Others will know this better than me, but I think, again, it's an issue we might want to think about. So I'll stop there. I've talked long enough already, and I really look forward to questions and seeing what everyone makes of the report. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Robin. Over to you, Meisha.
Thank you so much. Chief Executive Officers present, directors of different organizations present, and all distinguished guests, good morning. As you have been told, my name is Meisha Kodipo. I'm from Kenya and currently pursuing international hospitality management at Bournemouth University as a first-year student. It's my pleasure to be with you here today and to actively participate in this remarkable webinar. When this research was being conducted, I had just finished my foundation at Bournemouth International College. I was doing business, law, and finance. Career support and employability is a great opportunity in the university sector, and students do benefit a lot as they go through their degree or postgraduate courses to be better employees, and some end up even as potential employers. And before I continue, allow me to show my gratitude to the facilitators of this program, the Director of Higher Education Policy Institute, Mr. Hillman, Managing Director of Kaplan Pathways, Ms. Linda Cowan, and other stakeholders who work tirelessly to make sure that this research is conducted and the report is published on time. As an international student, I'm so grateful to have gotten this opportunity to participate in the launching of the final report of this program. When I reflect about 4 months ago, when I was requested by a certain staff from Kaplan, if I would like to participate in the focus group and give out my thoughts from an international student perspective about career support and employability, I did not hesitate to grab the opportunity because I knew the reason as to why I applied to come and study in the United Kingdom. One of the reasons was to get a good work placement, support, and even networking in my passionate course and future career. There's no doubt that every student, whether local or international, aspires to get a good work, a good job after their course, after their degree course. This is only possible if all characters involved in this journey of education are committed and know the market trends, because everything is changing and what the employers are looking for are different. I always tell my friends that education is not about individual traveling, but a group on a journey. With almost every university in the United Kingdom having career support department, it clearly indicates how committed the institutions are and what the students should expect from them. If you look at from the report, around 71% of the international students would really want to remain after their graduation so that they get sufficient experience that will enable them a secure job faster when they go back to their home country. The importance of this research is that it will help the students to make informed decisions based on the institution's reputation and kind of support they anticipate getting. The tertiary institutions also will be able to improve on the existing underpinning to enrich their students with the maximum support equivalent to their tuition fee. International students pay dearly and they expect much from the university. They expect a lot from the institution, not just the resources that are provided in the library. I suppose some of the reasons why international students come to study here in the United Kingdom are to get world-class learning experience and reasonable employment being the paramount. With the pandemic, I think this was the appropriate time to do this research because there are some rumors that say that the number of work are declining all over the world. And I think with this report is going to instill confidence in students and continues applying for this institution. I was reading an article from Indeed.com and it was discussing about what employers look for apart from the CV. I believe employability is about being suitable for getting a good job and a fulfilling work. Without the right skills, it becomes difficult for the graduates to secure a job in their chosen future career. To conclude, this report has instilled some confidence in me, and this is because it has vividly outlined students' expectations and how the pathways and the universities approach their learning strategies. I want to thank everyone who took part in this incredible research, and I look forward to participate in more of similar activities. Please alert me when such opportunities arise so that I can continue participating more. Thank you so much for listening to me, and I wish you well.
Thank you, Meisha. Brilliant. It's so important to have the voice of a current student in conversations like this. And we're now going to, there's lots of questions I'd love to ask you myself, but I'm not going to do that because we've had a nice flood of questions coming in the Q&A. So if I could ask, we'll have all the panelists up on the screen together, Linda, Meisha and Robin. And we'll go through the questions as they're coming in. If there's questions you particularly want to see answered, do upvote them if you can. But I'll get through as many as I can, and we'll take sort of them in groups of 3 or so each time. So the first one's from Mark Garrett, who's, if it's the Mark I'm thinking of, is at the University of Law. And Emma, can we turn on Mark's microphone and get him to ask his own question?
Hi, can you hear me, Nick?
We can. Good morning, Mark.
It is that said Mark Garrett. Hi, Linda. Long time since I met you when I first came in the sector, 2009 at City. I suppose my question was around the role that government / DIT can do to support universities in getting this kind of local market employability understanding, or whether you think we should be left to our own devices.
Thanks, Mark. And before people, a very important question, I think, and before people answer that, we're going to go to Albert Wright. And Albert, we're very grateful for the comments you often leave on our website to engage with our output. Albert, I think your microphone's now on.
Right, thank you. Yes. Well, I'm interested in 2 aspects, as I've said. Where do university students end up once they have got their degrees? Do they get their jobs in the UK? Do they get their jobs in the country where they came from? Or are they getting jobs in the global market?
Thank you, Albert. A factual question there, which we'll put to the speakers in a moment. Then there's an anonymous question. So I'm just going to read that out myself. He or she actually says it's a comment rather than a question. But we do experience it being harder for international students to gain work experience because many employers use work experience for talent pipelining. I'm hopeful that the new post-study work visa will allow this to open up. I mean, we could easily turn that into a question, will the new post-study work visa allow this to open up? So, Linda, can I go to you first? As I've said to the panelists already, it's not necessary to answer for each of you to answer every question, because I'm sure other panelists will pick up points as well. But Linda, over to you.
Yeah, and Nick, I've probably got a couple of comments that I'd probably make on those questions. Probably first on Mark's point, and maybe just linked into sort of government department support. I think there's two real opportunities. I think there is a definite need to actually, if the government can help to do more to actually bring greater clarity to businesses and companies in the UK around the ability to employ international students, because I think Robin's comment is a very valid one. It can often, as a company, appear more difficult to employ international sort of students, and therefore that can often put people off actually employing international sort of students. So if we can address that, that will make a massive difference. And I think it's vitally important to be doing this, because actually lots of international students have come to the UK with high expectations around the graduate sort of visa route. And if we don't address that in terms of educating employers, then actually it could become a negative to the UK. So that would certainly be one. And then I think the other opportunity I would highlight is the government's international education strategy, which obviously is welcomed and important. But for the priority markets that are within that strategy, I think there's a real opportunity there for the government to help lead the way to get some really good data, both on current employment needs and actually future employment needs for those priority markets that are in the strategy, because that would be a really significant and valuable resource for all UK universities to be using to then be focusing on career support for those particular markets, and then looking at where it's transferable to other areas. So that would be my two that I'd probably shout out.
Thank you, Linda. And we must make sure Steve Smith, the International Education Champion, gets a copy of this paper if he hasn't indeed already had one. Robin.
Sure. I mean, good questions, difficult questions, and I think I should have done a bit more homework before coming on today. In terms of that question on do we know really where the students go, we know far more about UK students. I think the tracking of international students, long-term destinations, has been much weaker, and perhaps it's beginning to be addressed a bit more by the Higher Education Statistics Agency and so forth through the graduate outcome surveys. But I think the answer is that we don't have as strong a knowledge as perhaps we ought to. On that issue of how the first one, Mark's question about, can government help with this perceived need for universities to have better knowledge of labour markets in various countries. I'm a wee bit sceptical of this whole thing, if I'm honest. But I think what I would say probably is, rather than trying to have lots of careers advisors in our UK career services tasked with all of this, then probably in the same way that universities have agents in various countries, that maybe that same sort of model where one relies upon more locally derived information and sucks it in that way, that might be a route. The one I probably really want to focus on, though, although I won't be long, is on the issue of employers, and is it harder to offer work experience to international students in UK, and the concept of talent pipelining, etc. Absolutely. I mean, employers are only going to do this. Well, to some extent, employers do this out of goodwill, but mostly it's because they want something out of it. They want the skills. They want a talented student to help in various projects. For short placements, it can be as much effort to manage a placement as it is you get out of it. If you're an employer, if we're brutally honest. And part of this is about the long-term prospect that if you get hold of a really good student, you maintain contact with them and you might want to employ them long-term. In the context of international student, that's almost always going to be weaker potential, because there is a greater chance that they will leave the country either voluntarily or necessarily. And if indeed you did want to employ them long-term, then conceivably you've got to go down through a sponsorship route and so forth, which all sounds like quite hard work. And I think mitigates against, as strong a motivation for the employer to take up the offer, and actually appoint an international student. I think these are really hard things to get around.
Thanks, Robin. And Meisha, I don't know if you want to respond to any of those questions, or I mean, I had a question for you really, which links to all of them, which is for you, if you're happy to answer this, what was the appeal of the UK? Was it linked to things like the post-study work visa, or was it something entirely different that led you to studying at Bournemouth?
Thank you very much. I think what inspired me to come to study here, first of all, was international market, because everybody is running for the global market, and this is what even some sustainable business are looking up to. And if someone has the relevant experience based on their industry, I think whether you are international student or local student, the employer should just consider you. It doesn't matter where you come from or what, but the employer should just consider you. But I know there are some instances where the Brexit has caused some challenges, and this is going to affect or benefit the international students, but maybe the employers may not accept the rules on that. So I'm sure that one we are going to discuss, or somebody might raise that question, but we are going to discuss.
Thank you for bringing up the B word, because I don't think any of us had yet mentioned it, and of course it's very, very important, because it's had a dramatic impact on the numbers coming, particularly from Eastern Europe, actually, to the UK for this academic year. So let's go to the next round of questions. We'll go to the top one there. I'm Vizak, I think. I'm sorry if I've mispronounced your name. Emma, can we turn their microphone on? do say who you are and where you're from. I don't know. Oh, here we go.
Hello, can you hear me?
We can, perfectly.
Yes, I just wanted to ask, if the companies are ready to sponsor after 2 years, after our education for 2 years study visa, will they be also sponsoring us after that? Because I had talked to some employers during career fair, and all of them are not sure, confused, because that is also new for them. So this is what I wanted to ask.
Thank you. And do you mind telling us where you're studying?
I'm studying in the University of Leeds.
Leeds, great. And what are you studying?
Studying international business.
Great, brilliant. Great to have you on the call, and we'll put that to our panelists in a moment. Next, I'm going to go to Anne-Marie Graham, and I should have said really in my introduction that we've been incredibly grateful for UKISA's help in sourcing people for the focus groups, for example. But Anne-Marie Graham, do tell people a little bit about your important work.
Thanks, Nick, and yeah, happy to help. I'm happy our ambassadors were able to participate because it is really important research. So we're really delighted to see this bear fruit today, and really interesting to hear the discussion and to reflect on the recommendations of the report. The question I had was homing in on the work experience front. Obviously, it's really pleased to have this research and reflect on that, because it is a concern that we hear a lot from students, and it is about that perceived lack of parity with domestic students when they're accessing work experience. So obviously, Robin, you mentioned that students there's a limit in the student visa on how many hours a week they can work. And sometimes that perhaps causes confusion as well as around volunteering. But I think it is a really important step for the sector to make sure that we do have that parity of opportunity, or that international students feel that they have equal access to work experience opportunities during their studies as domestic students. So I wondered whether it had come out in the discussions or in the writing of the report, if there's any reflections on what we can do as a sector to help ensure that greater parity of opportunity.
Thank you. A very important question, given, of course, that your chances in the labour market afterwards are massively improved if you've done work experience. And thank you for all you do, Anne-Marie, to ensure there's a healthy sector for international students. I'm next going to go to my former colleague, Rachel Hewitt, CEO of Million Plus, who's got a question that lots of other people seem interested in too. So Rachel, over to you.
Thanks, Nick. Yeah, I mean, it's been touched on to some degree, but there's obviously been a lot more focus on student outcomes from HE and the graduate labour market in recent years. We might see that more of that coming through in the upcoming spending review, but the metrics often focus quite a lot on domestic students. And I wondered what the panel's thoughts on were on whether that presents a challenge in terms of sort of pushing for better guidance for international students, particularly with all the competing priorities for universities at the moment. So
Rachel, just remind us that the Graduate Outcome Survey, HESA, is only for home students, is that right?
No, it covers international students as well, but it has lower response rate targets. And I suppose, although it covers them, it seems like there's less sort of pickup of the data for international students.
It's used less. Okay, great. Thank you. I'm going to shake it up a bit now. So I'm going to go to Robin first on those three questions.
The questions are getting harder. On the first one, on sort of company sponsorship, all I can say, to be honest, is from the employer, I think it's going to be incredibly dependent on this kind of skill supply and the needs of the employers. There are certain areas where we are struggling as employers to find the right people, and in those areas, frankly, we will push the boat out far more in considering things like sponsorship, etc. What I would say is that smaller companies don't tend to plan over long time periods, and so anything that takes a long time will be quite hard for a small company to do. If I can move on to the other questions, this parity of work experience, which I think I kind of raised to some extent in my input, hopefully. I just think this is really, really hard territory. And I'd say two things about it. One is that I did a bit of homework and had a look at the results from the Future Track study, which was admittedly about 5 years ago, maybe even more than that, but big samples and so forth. And what that found was that around 20% of all students, all undergraduates, didn't do any work at all. In other words, and really what I'm considering is that we need to consider experiences of work more widely than just structured work experience placements. And probably about 25% of students do a structured placement, but about 3/4 of students do some kind of work, whether it's on campus, in a bar, or wherever at some point. So what you end up with is only about 20% of all students don't do anything. On the other hand, in the survey we've just done, what we saw was that 40% of students have done nothing at all. So actually there does seem to be a clear difference between the two, and the international students are doing less work of one kind or another while they're in the UK. How we get to parity, I think I really don't know. Sorry, Anne-Marie. I think it's difficult, but maybe we should at least broaden the discussion to think about experiences of work rather than just particularly structured placements. And the metrics question, again, I think one I kind of introduced anyway, just a moment ago. The Delhi survey used to look at UK students and EU. In theory, graduate outcomes now is wider than that, but just practically, it is easier to get to the UK students. And also what we have to remember is that much of the survey work is done by the careers services, and they're naturally going to be more closely in contact, I guess, with the UK alumni rather than international. And so it is all a little bit circular, but maybe we do need to shift the metrics a bit to encourage greater attention. And we as careers researchers are forever complaining about lack of ability to get to alumni in order to do impact studies.
Thank you, Robin. Meisha, is there any of those questions you want to respond to? Don't feel you need to.
I may not respond to all of them, but allow me to respond about the time working limit. I think this is, as an international student, we have different perspective towards it, but I think to some extent it may help the students concentrate in their studies and also get them experience on their course. So if some people may perceive it differently, that we need to be like local students, but maybe there's a reason that why there's that limit. So we just have to accept and work with that. But there's opportunity after you have, because if you focus on your studies and do well, the possibility of you working here is still high. Yeah.
Thank you. And Linda, over to you.
Yeah, and Nick, I'm desperate to answer Rachel's question because it's such a brilliant question. And Rachel, I think my headline answer is absolutely yes. I think it's one of the most frustrating things that certainly I come across is that small proportion of students, international students, whose data is part of the HESA graduate sub outcomes. And I think it will only change if the metrics change and actually universities are in a position that they have to get higher responses from international students. And my view is international students deserve to actually be more higher profile in those statistics so that they can make informed decisions when they come to the UK. But we have to recognise it is more time consuming and it's more difficult to get that information from international students who may have gone back to their home country. But I think that's back down to the resource point. International students bring in a lot of tuition fees into the UK. Some of that money's got to go into actually the support services that are needed, and whether that's career services or other data services in universities, to ensure there is a higher participation rate, to ensure there is better data and better outcomes for international students to make an informed choice. So I think international students are probably disappointed in the current position, and they deserve a lot better in my view. Last one I would put out, the work experience, and this is something we're doing within Kaplan, but the move that has happened over the last 18 months in terms of virtual internships being made available to such students, I think personally is a really great development for international students, because it means that students can get short virtual internship opportunities with countries in different parts of the world, which obviously does help international students to build up their own network in their home country and also gain experience. So we as a company, we've now launched some of our own pathway courses that now have virtual internships as part of the course. They are proving very popular in market, and I think the key reason is because students see the value in getting work experience experience, but also the fact they could get work experience in the country they're hoping to go back to for future employment. So it's got double benefits.
Thank you, Linda. And as I think the panelists have said, of course, our report out today has finds lots of positive things about the support provided and lots of areas where we can do more. And I do hope people working in universities don't regard that as an implicit criticism of all their hard work. I hope they regard that as a document they can take to their vice chancellors and their senior management team and say, this is why our work needs to be properly resourced inside our universities so that we can do even more of the things that we do well already. But I'd like to get in, we've only got about 20 minutes left, and I'd like to get in at least 2 more rounds of comments and questions. So if I could ask questioners and responders to be short and snappy, then I think we'll be able to do that. And I'm going to go to people who haven't already spoken. So the first one is an anonymous question, actually, about Brexit. And it says there's an exodus of EU people out of the UK, sadly, and for that to be replaced by other international students, companies and businesses will have to sponsor and help students. What does the panel think will happen? So it's really a question about Brexit and the impact of Brexit on non-EU students as well as EU students. Then I'm going to go to Moy McHale, who's put 2 comments in there. Moy, maybe we can turn on your microphone. There you are, brilliant. Say where you're from as well, Moy.
Oh, I'm Moy McHale. I work in the Professional Liaison Network at the University of Bristol. So I have a few questions for you today. My first question would be sort of your views on sort of what the impact of the new graduate route visa has been. And then my second question is just wanted to know if anyone could provide any particular insight about sort of some attitudes and behaviours of some sort of international students that you've come across in your research. You know, have you noticed that there is a particular trend from a specific region, and, you know, there's specific types of work experience or skills that you're finding by region or by country that some students are interested in developing when they come to study at UK institutions?
Thank you. An important question, because of course not all international students are the same. Martin Edmondson, who many of people will know, but Martin, introduce yourself and put your question.
Okay. Hi everyone, my name is Martin Edmondson. I'm the Managing Director of GradCore, and we work on with a lot of universities in the UK around student and graduate employability, graduate recruitment, that kind of stuff. So I was just interested, there's obviously been a major growth in a lot of these master's programs with a placement year bolted on at UK universities, to some degree, perhaps a bit of a kind of cash cow model, to be honest, it could be seen as. And there's a major challenge there, I think, in terms of the potential for sort of overpromise, under-deliver in terms of offering that placement. But what pointers does the research give us in terms of who should be responsible for sourcing those placements? The university, the student, both, and can this research perhaps help drive maybe more of an imperative for more resource to source those placements? Because it's, I think my instinct would be the students arrive expecting, a fair bit of input, if not those placements to be there.
Thank you. And now I'm going to go to, I think Gemma Kenyon's question is sort of been answered about whether HESA does enough to reach international students. So unless Gemma, do feel free to add another comment if that's not correct. So I'm going to go to James Heritage.
Hello there, thank you for a moment. From recent looking at vacancies in the graduate market, many employers are starting to make it clear that they will not accept students who are taking the graduate route post-study visa as a means of kind of breaking into graduate schemes. We're talking large employers here. We're just kind of quite surprised by employers' responses for that, stating that they cannot plan forward enough to be able to plan whether somebody would be suitable for sponsorship after taking a vacancy. And I just wondered if there was, if the panel had any thoughts on what we could be doing to encourage employers to rethink recruitment processes and to think about how they go about considering international students to make use of this opportunity for the 2-year post-study visa.
Thank you. So responsibilities on employers. Meisha, do you want to respond to any of those first?
Yes, allow me to respond about the last question. about the responsibility among the employers to international students. I think this is going to be very important if the employers can rethink how they employ the students, because these decisions are not made by the students, or neither are they made by the country, the local country of the student. So we are just coming here to study and get the necessary experience from the institution. And if you get the enough experience from the given industry, you maximize on the skills. So the employer should not be discriminatory in terms of the skills or the route you come with and all such things, because the visa is just there like permission to study, but not restricted to work.
Thank you. And of course, there's good evidence, isn't there? I think if you employ people who speak different languages, for example, you tend to be much more successful at exporting. There's some real benefits to employers of having more diverse workforces. But Linda.
A couple of points, Nick, I would say, in Moya's point about differences with international students, I absolutely agree with that, and I think it's hugely important as providers and institutions that we're understanding the sort of student body that come to us, and often making sure that we've got regional approaches, because there is big variation amongst international students in terms of students coming from certain parts of the world where actually their first priority is to try and get a job in the UK post graduation, from other students where actually they really do want to go back to the home country. And I think you do see significant variations across regions, and I think it's important to take that into account. So that would certainly be one. I think James's point was really interesting. I would probably, James, passionately argue with you, not cash cows, is more about meeting student demand in terms of bedding placements into the programmes. But where I definitely agree with James is that actually there is responsibility on an institution. You've got to feel confident you're only bringing enough students into the courses where you can feel confident between yourself and the students they will be successful in getting placements. Otherwise, you're being irresponsible as an institution. So that would be my two thoughts.
Thank you. And Robin, anything to add?
Yeah, champing the bit slightly on this one, actually. Thankfully, Linda's picked up the part on sort of heterogeneity of the population, and I completely agree with that. So kind of moving on to this issue of, I mean, on the placement side with master's courses, we're actually evaluating some new master's courses at the moment, and this is very much risen as an issue, particularly in the context of COVID. And I think Linda's view there about responsibility is absolutely right. And I think, frankly, there has been some irresponsibility, if I can say so, overall across the universities, a lot of them that we're, overall in that evaluation, that frankly, they've really hoped for the best. And they've got large numbers of students, and they certainly will not all be walking away with placements, or at least not placements as we would originally have envisaged them. I want to react really, though, to that issue of large employers not being keen on students who come to the new graduate route. And to be honest, I think there's a bit of naivety, if I dare, maybe I'm being the grit in the oyster here, but I think there's a bit of naivety in the sense that, employers will change their behavior because it will be good for students in universities. I mean, employers are ultimately, for the most part, very self-interested, and they will employ international students if they think the outcomes for the employer will be better. And if they're doubtful about it, and if they're thinking that we don't really want new graduate route students into their graduate scheme programs because of perhaps when the entitlements run out or whatever it might be, I can fully understand that. And again, it will come back to supply and demand, and perhaps what the onus is on the university sector is to demonstrate the additional value of those international students, and then the employers might be more tempted to buy it. At the moment, frankly, I think if there is an oversupply, we have to think that large graduate programs, roughly speaking, as I understand it, are oversubscribed by about 70 to 1. It's not as though they're short of people, and so hoping that they're going to take more international students, I think, is arguably naive, unless a case is strongly made to say that the employer will actually do better out of it. And as Nick has said, it might well be that things like the greater intercultural awareness, the better language skills, the wider range of language skills, etc., could really be leveraged. And my observation, I guess, would be that actually, in order to be an international student, you have to be pretty darn motivated and a bit of a risk taker. And that's something that perhaps, isn't fully recognized, that there's a lot of skills built up and attitudes and behaviors and so forth that are gained through mobility, which most UK students don't get. And so I think really it's for the university sector to demonstrate some of this and maybe work with some employers to do some experiments to get some better impact data on this.
Thank you, Robin. I think we've only probably got time for one more round of questions and then closing remarks, but I would urge everybody to look at the Q&A, because there's some of the questions have quite rich commentary in them themselves, and I'm sure people will want to continue this conversation after the webinar. I'll be blown away by the level of interest in it, actually. So, but we will take another round, and I'd like to go to Valentina next, please. You can turn on her microphone. Morning.
Oh, hello. I hope you can hear me now.
We can.
Good morning, everyone. Hello, I'm Valentina and I work at UCL, where I am an insights and market research manager. So yeah, perhaps another way to frame my question would be, are there any lessons we can learn from our international competitors when it comes from a career support perspective? I think Linda mentioned that students are considering career support and employability outcomes already at pre-application stage. And so obviously they will be looking at the UK provision compared to what our competitors are also able to offer. I wonder if perhaps the panel could comment on that. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And are you thinking of any countries in particular, the obvious competitors, I'm guessing?
Oh yeah, any insight would be fantastic. But obviously, yeah, I put down the USA, Australia, Germany, the Netherlands would be another obvious suspect there. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Let's go to Brenda, who describes herself as an international student postgraduate. Brenda Hernandez. Here we go. Good morning, Brenda.
Hello. Yeah, so I'm an MA student, and prior to being an MA student here, I was also an international student in the US. And some of the difficulties I found in both countries was the limitations on freelancing, especially through COVID. Just in my recent job searches, a higher number of employers are looking for freelancers rather than long-term contract workers, because like the uncertainty that COVID created, obviously, you don't want to commit to an employee if, I don't know, another lockdown will happen, things like that. Yeah, so actually I've building my MA project around this issue and trying to get something moving regarding freelancing for international students, because it would definitely be a good incentive, especially since Australia and Canada do allow freelancing if you're an international student.
Thank you. An important point that hasn't previously come up. So I'm going to go to Julie Allen now.
Hi Nick, thanks. I mean, I think it's been really interesting that a lot of this has already been answered, but it was just about. And sorry, I'm from UKISA as well, so we've managed to get 2 questions in this morning. But yeah, I really appreciate your honesty, Robin, about the barriers to employers, and I think it has already been covered that we need to highlight the benefits. So I mean, I guess it was just about that, like. How do we go about that? What more do we need to persuade employers of the positives of employing international students and what they bring? Some of it's already been covered, but yeah, just any other thoughts on that?
Great, thank you very much. So I'm going to go back to the panel now, and it's really panel your chance to say anything else that you haven't had a chance to get off your chest this morning, but that you feel needs to be discussed. So I think we'll go in the opposite order to how we began. So Meisha, we'll go with you first.
Yeah, let me start with Valentina's question, and she asked about is there any country or that UK can learn from? And I think in my view as an international student, education is one of the inward investment that the British has, and learning is a process, and it doesn't mean if you are far ahead you don't need to learn. There are so many countries, and the examples she has given are very relevant. We also have Germany, we also have Canada, Dubai, maybe in different sectors. So you learn from the potential from a certain country. If maybe Japan is good in manufacturing, for example, or in another industry, you learn from them, then you come and implement in your country. So Valentina, your question is very relevant to this research, and this is going to be very important for the employers as they look for the good employees. And to Julie's question, we talked about that one. And just to add, first of all, is that the work of employee to persuade the employer. And how do you do this? By be outstanding from the crowd. So factors that can help you outstand in the crowd is a good work experience, good CV, good reputation from your institution. It's not about getting good grade, but what else can you bring on the table? And those are some of the factors that can help you persuade your employers as an international student. Because even if you go back to your country, there were several factors that the local market employer will look. Where have you worked, the company, your reputation, and such extra. Yeah. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Meisha. Robin, over to you.
Yeah, if I may, I'm just going to focus on really one of the issues there, and it's the one we were talking about a bit before, around sort of the cost benefit perception, if you like, from the point of view of the employer. And I think there's some hope in a way. If you go back 10, 15 years, all of these big employers were demanding a 2-1, and in many cases they were recruiting from a relatively narrow range of universities, the top employers I'm talking about. They've shifted that dramatically. And the reason they shifted it, and they've even now said, well, we're not worried about the grade you get, really. You don't need to get a 2-1. And actually, we're not that fussed generally about your academic attainment. And the reason they've moved to that is because one or two far-sighted employers started analysing their workforces and how people progressed. And they realised that academic attainment, whether you got a first or a 2-1 or a 2-2, is not a good predictor of how well you do as an employee in one of these large companies. It's a different set of competencies that really work. And because of that, they shifted their pattern. They changed their recruitment. And once a few started doing it, lots of them followed. And now pretty much the field has changed. So what I guess where I'm going with this is the same sort of issue, the same sort of approach maybe needs to be taken with international students. And that perhaps in turn suggests that we need to do some experiments. Perhaps one or two universities need to get together with student employers who've got very good contacts in all of these employers, in addition to the university's own contacts, and do some research. That's a good message for me as a researcher. But these companies need to track some people and just see how powerful some of these international students could be. There may well be case studies already in there, but certainly there's plenty of scope for this, and there is evidence, therefore, that employers will behave in ways they think will fit them best, and are very happy to learn and change based on experiences. So I think that's the big lesson there. And the other one I would say, which is touched upon very briefly, is that there is a bit of a game changer going on in the fact that so many more of these opportunities can now be virtual. And it takes away a lot of the kind of the localness of work experiences and jobs and the like. And I'm hesitant to use the word virtual internship because I'm not sure really that's right. It's still an internship. It's just that it's an internship and the work itself was virtual. So, I don't think I've got a virtual job. I've still got a job, which is done mostly virtually. And we need to apply the same perhaps in virtual internships are just as valid pretty much as physically located internships. So I think there are opportunities coming in that direction too, particularly in the context of international students.
Thank you, Robin. That's an important thought. Linda, over to you. Your chance to say anything that still needs to be said.
To Valentina, I would say, I think really all the major markets for international students are studying. I think all the major markets are recognising the importance of international students, but nobody's really leading the way in the area, which means that there's a real opportunity for the UK to lead in the way. If I was drawing one out, I'd probably say Australia are doing some quite innovative work. The Australian Trade and Investment Commission have set up a really a sort of student portal for students specifically on employability, so that all universities can draw on the same resources resources. It's got the makings of being something good, but it's still in a development phase. But you can see clear activity taking place. And then, Nick, I think my lasting thought would be, I think for all employers in the UK, we are all recognising that students coming out of university are slightly different in terms of many of them are fairly transient and therefore looking for job opportunities for shorter periods of time than certainly it was when I was coming out of university, and people maybe were 5-10 years ago. So I think as employers, we all are opening our minds to recognise that actually you may have good graduates for 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, but for shorter durations, and I think that creates a slightly better level playing field for international students who may be looking for employments for a shorter period of time. And then I can think of no better contact that a university can, a company can have than to have a great international student that works with you for 1 year, 2 years and goes back to the home country, because that's a fantastic contact for the future. And if you're a business that's trying to operate globally, then actually that's going to be one of your major assets. And I think that's a point that we need to probably amplify more within the sector.
Well, thank you, Linda. I mean, I must say, when we started this project a few months ago, I don't think, I knew it was important. I don't think I understood just how much engagement it was going to get. We've had more people sign up to this webinar than just about any other webinar we've done during the crisis. I've been very struck by the media coverage the report has had. They've nearly all of them, you know, PI, study, travel, university business, they've gone on different angles of the report, which shows, I think, how rich this whole topic is and how much more we all need to discuss it. And possibly, Robin, as you say, do further research through you and others to really get bottom some of this stuff out. So, and we plan to run a series of blogs on our website responding to these conversations, and I know we'd all be keen to hear from people who weren't able to get their question in to continue this conversation through email. But I'm going to call it to a halt because we promised to finish by 11:45, even though I know there's plenty more we could go on to discuss. And I just want to note a couple of things before I do that. I mean, first of all, of course, as everybody on this call knows all too well, you know, our university sector absolutely relies on international students. Yes, financially, but also educationally, to enrich the conversations that go on our university campus and make sure our campuses are properly diverse, properly international. And of course, the whole UK benefits, as our recent soft power index shows, you know, what people who've been international students in the UK go on to do at the very top levels of industry and politics and charitable work is phenomenal. And in fact, some of Robin's previous research show how much the UK benefits from that as well. And I think the other thing that stands out for me is, even though we are very good as a country at some of this stuff, we absolutely cannot rest on our laurels, because other countries are very good at it too. And other countries are desperate to recruit more international students, and therefore to maintain the UK's position as the second biggest recruiter of international students, you absolutely cannot stand still. You have to get constantly better. And this is clearly one area where, as I say, I hope people doing the sorts of jobs many of you listening in do are able to use this report with your managers to convince them of the importance of this topic. So the only final thing I'd like to say is to thank obviously our partners on this project, which has been co-produced with Kaplan. Robin and his colleagues at Crack, Rachel and Dasha, who are listening in from Sybil, who led on the opinion poll work, Meshach for speaking so brilliantly. It's so important to have that student voice. All of you for listening in, and also my colleagues. There's a lot of back office technical organisation that goes into one of these, and I'd like to thank Emma in particular, also Lucy, Michael, Alexis. And then I'll just close by saying, of course, we do a series of these events. We've got another one next week, next Thursday, on a different topic, research and development at the 2.4% target, and how we can how that links to regional policy and levelling up, with obviously the backdrop of the spending review that's happening in just a couple of weeks' time. So I'm going to call it to a halt there, but thank you very much for attending. Enjoy the rest of the day, and do stay in touch on this and other issues. Many thanks.